Ray.
Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Nice to see everyone. Great to have you all. As usual, in the chat, we'd love to have you connect, share how you'd like to connect with people, whether that's LinkedIn, that's email, or some other way. Please connect with each other. Use the chat to do that. And the other thing that's always fun is if you're up for it, please consider renaming yourself and put where you're zooming in from, so we get to see where everyone is coming in from. And happy Friday. I like to say Friday. I don't know what's the weather like for you in Oregon, Becky. Up here in Montana, we are going to be in the 80s. It's like unseasonably hot up here this weekend. Crazy.
Oh, we have been so cold, but we went from the 50s and we're going to just barely get to the 80s today. 79, I think, is what I saw.
What's it like for everyone else? And what's it like in Santa Fe? Beautiful Santa Fe.
It's beautiful. It's a little chilly. It's like 60 and super windy. So not good hiking weather.
Hi, Carrie. We've had a bit of a roller coaster. At Mariana experienced this as well. We had a bit of a roller coaster this week. We had on Sunday, I was out in shorts and t-shirt in mid to high 70 degrees. Then we had massive snowstorm on Monday, trees down everywhere, including all around my garden, and it's been chilly. And now it's going to be in the 70s over the weekend. So it's
now we're headed back up. It was a week to trigger migraines for sure.
Yes.
It was just up and down, and it was just headaches on and off because of the unstable weather.
Yeah, it's called springtime in Utah.
I believe it. Oh, it's so nice to see everyone. Well, we're going to get started here shortly. But just as a reminder, again, if you haven't already, please put your connection, how you'd like to connect with everyone in the chat. Becky and I are so excited to see you all here for our May program with Ann Betz. So excited to have you here. Just want to remind everyone that our program today, you'll get one CCE, and it is this is so funny to say, like it's not just a whole number. 0.75 of those will go for core competencies and 0.25 will go for research development. But you get one CCE, and in order to get that, you do need to stay for the whole time, and then we'll send a survey that you'll answer, and that will give us the way to send you the certificate of attendance. So just as that friendly reminder. The other thing is, I hope that as we're getting ready to hear Ann, you're thinking about your questions that you might have for her, because I think Ann will have some time for you to do that. So be thinking in your mind now for when that time comes. The other thing that we'll share with you, just a teaser right now, but we'll talk more about it at the end. We do have two more. Normally we have one program each month, as you all know, but next week we have two special programs for International Coaching Week. So for all of you fabulous coaches, the one thing that we invite everybody to do is spread the word, spread the love about coaching, the positive impact that coaching makes as a part of the International Coaching Week. That means feel free to, blog about it, write about it, tag ICF High Country when you do. Anything that helps spread the word about the positive impact that coaching can make in our world. And we, of course, invite you to join us next Monday and next Wednesday, and we'll provide the links and stuff at the end so that you'll know where to sign up for those. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen, our High Country chapter president, to kick us off. Oh, and we are recording. Okay, great. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you, Carrie. Let me go ahead and share my screen with the group, because we've got a PowerPoint to share with everyone with a lot of great information. Hopefully everyone is seeing kind of the welcome slide to that. Awesome. All righty. And kind of to kick us off with a thought for our time together today. The world's favorite season is the spring. All things seem to be possible in May. And as we dive into our information, Carrie's touched a bit on some of these things. But one thing that we wanted to bring to your attention today is come June, we will be transitioning over our board, and we still have openings to fulfill there on the board. So if you're curious about what this really entails as far as any of these positions that we have open, we would love to chat with you about that. So I will put my ICF president's email in the chat after we turn it on over into our fabulous speaker, Ann, today. And I will also pop this PowerPoint link into the chat as well for everyone, because I've hyperlinked some things, in particularly this little hyperlink at the bottom. Fill out a bit of an application. It should help clarify some things, but always recommend chatting with the board members, because we'll be able to give you that holistic picture if you're curious. In other high country news, just as Carrie mentioned, International Coaching Week is happening next week. These are the two events that Carrie mentioned. We'll be having one on May 13th and one on May 15th. And we also will be participating in that coast to coast pro bono coaching. There's a lot of board members that are doing that. There's a lot of coaches in the chapter that are also joining in on that as well. If you're curious about that, we can share that information with you. That way you can jump on board and join us for that coast to coast. And then as kind of reminders, but also as promised, a while back ago, we've got some new events occurring too for the chapter. So our monthly Coach Connect happens on the first Wednesday of the month from 12 to 1 Mountain Time. And then finally, those quarterly high country huddles, it was a hurdle getting that nailed down as far as a date and time, but we've done it. We're excited about it and would love to see as many folks from the chapter come and join us. The first one is going to be May 20th, again, noon to 1 Mountain Time. And then we've got a couple more dates yet to come, but you can mark them on your calendar and you'll have an opportunity to register for those a bit later on. And then our monthly chapter update newsletter. If you're not receiving that, please feel free to email myself or anyone on the board, and we will connect you and get you on the listserv for that. There's a lot of great information that goes out in that newsletter. Turning over to ICF Global, the credentialing series that ICF Global is offering is still happening. A lot of it's being on our learning portal as far as recordings and being able to access it there. And they're touching on a wide variety of things, from what it really takes to, have your certification, what the test involves, because they've revamped that, all sorts of great information. Those communities of practice, wonderful places to really get other learning opportunities happening on a wide and rich array of topics. And those credentialing candidate guidelines, those are updated. I've got those hyperlinked for everyone here. Converge, 2023, if you're curious about what happened at Converge, they've got it on demand at this point. And then just DEIB news, Global is really at the forefront of this, and want to make sure that we connect the chapter with all of the happenings going on in our DEIB realm. And I'm going to turn it on over to Carrie again.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. There's a lot going on, isn't there? Woo.
There is.
It's fabulous. Okay, so let's dive in. So excited for our May program to introduce Ann, coming all the way from Santa Fe. Woohoo! Ann is the co-founder of Be Above Leadership. She is an international speaker and trainer on the intersection of neuroscience, coaching, and human transformation. She was a faculty member and served as the neuroscience consultant to the Coaches Training Institute, CTI, for many years. She provides neuroscience, leadership, and coaching consulting to many corporations, nonprofits, including the ICF. She's a certified professional coach for 20 years, a PCC. She is the author of the groundbreaking white paper on brain research and coaching. She contributes to Choice Magazine, Coaching at Work, Coaching World, the ICF, and CTI blogs. She has been knee-deep in neuroscience and coaching and the intersection of the two for over a decade, making her one of a few people who have really spent so much time and research in that area. And so we're thrilled to have you come and help us make sense of neuroscience and coaching and the intersection of the two of them. So welcome, Ann. So grateful to have you.
Well, thank you all. It's so great to be here. I was saying as we were getting connected, it's just fun to be with people who speak mountain time because I just love living in the West and I love the energy of the West. The West just drew me. I grew up in Minnesota, but I now love living in New Mexico. And so yay for the West of the United States. Oh my goodness. Well, what we're going to talk about today is neuro-myths. What are some of the myths about the brain that are particularly, prevalent in our profession? What are the myths? What's the reality? What do we know? Even talking about why do some of these myths continue to be out there in the world, and maybe what's the problem with that. So let me just pull up my PowerPoint. I will be not PowerPointing the whole time, but just to let you know what to expect. I am curious, first of all, and we're going to give you a little time in small groups coming right up, for you to talk about what are some of the brain myths that you wonder about, and maybe you know the truth, but you wonder, why is this so pervasive? I will talk about the top 5 and the reality of those myths. And then we're going to have a big chunk of time for kind of an ask me anything. I'm very informal. If you've ever been hung around me before, I don't, do a super formal and then you can ask, because I love to hear what's spiking for you as we go through things. So I think we have you set up for small groups, and here is your question. What neuromyths, what brain myths in coaching / human development do you wonder about? Again, it can either be like, is this true? Or I know this isn't true, but why are people still talking about it? Because I've got some thoughts about that. So we'll do that. You've got 10 minutes and then we'll get you back here to hear what you came up with.
And Becky is working the magic behind the scenes.
Putting you in breakout rooms.
Yeah. Thanks, Becky.
She's getting everybody in. You can be thinking in the meantime, what are those myths?
Yeah.
Okay, have fun in your breakout rooms. Is Lisa in a room? Oh, there she is. And Becky, probably want to stop the recording.
Well, it's okay. We were kind of joking about the, we only use 10% of our brains.
Oh,
kind of myth,
that's
right?
a good one.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, sorry. Should somebody else share?
No,
Oh, okay.
give me one more and then we'll see what else.
Sure.
And I am definitely, I have a slide on the right and left hemisphere. So for sure.
Great. Another one was also neurodevelopmental stages. Like that keeps changing too, right? Even prefrontal cortex, like for the longest time, it doesn't develop until 25. Now we're seeing until 30. And then in neurodivergent people, it's different. And so it's like, where are we actually at with like those stages?
Okay. Let me see. So hold on to those and let's see. And we'll see if, I think I've got something where the stages sort of fits into that. If not, we'll make sure there's time to talk about that. It's such the big picture that I'm going to say, and then I want to hear from another group is one of the things, I have a bit of a magpie brain. I love the next bright, shiny thing. And that is why neuroscience is such a good fit for me, because there's always something new. It's like, all right, what else? What else do we not know? Okay. Thank you so much, Mariana. What else came out of your conversations? Let's hear a few more things. Jump in.
I was in a room with Kimberly and Lisa, and we were talking about kind of almost that feeling of like the way that our brains or the way we respond to things, and feeling like maybe it's only us. So that kind of feeling of like maybe it's just me, and what we're learning through neuroscience is that in fact, no, all of our brains are hardwired to behave in certain ways. And so it isn't just only us. And so there's that kind of myth around like, I'm the only one experiencing these things. But in fact, it's not just us.
Which is sort of cool and not cool both at the same time. I was like, wait, I thought I was so special. But I have to tell you, in bringing neuroscience into coaching and developing some comfort level with neuroscience, one of the things that my students tell me a lot is that it is in the best possible way, often very neutralizing for their clients. So on the one hand, it's not that you're not special, but it is like, why is this happening for me? It's like, because you are having a neurotypical, your brain is doing what it's designed to do. Like, we lose focus when we're stressed, and your brain is designed to do that. So no, you're not losing your mind. And that can be so calming for clients to understand that the brain is designed to work in certain ways. And if you understand it, you can be more graceful with it. So, and then on the other hand, we're all special. So at the same time, we're all special. There was a guy, everybody remember Garrison Keillor from Minnesota, and he used to talk about this fictional town called Lake Wobegon, where all the children are above average. I grew up with Garrison Keillor. All right, what else? Let's hear from maybe, at least one or two more groups, and then we'll dive in. What came up in your group?
One thing that came up in our group that we weren't sure if it's a myth or reality is the idea that people have very specific learning styles, and that if you miss their learning style, you miss them altogether.
Ah, yes, good. That's a good one. Okay. We can definitely talk about that. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where I can fit that in, but I made a note, so I'll make sure I come back to it. Love that. All right. Anything else that we haven't really hit so far? Rebecca said constantly debunking the learning style. Got it.
We had a couple other ones in our group too, with Jen and Emily, about Jen was talking about how sometimes there can be a sense that you can catch something that's going on in the brain, whether it's epilepsy or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Like it's, yeah. No, I don't think so, unless it's mad cow disease and you eat a diseased brain. Like I don't. However, what that might point to is how we influence each other. So let me talk about the sort of, well, you can't catch things, but you can be influenced by things.
Which kind of leads into about like another one, studies of facial expressions, that they are not universal. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
You can't be an expert communicator by thinking to know just what to look like in somebody's expression or how they move their eyes.
That's a good one. That's a very good one. That's a good myth. Yeah, that's
maybe
good.
the idea of the primitive brain in general. So
Sort of the
The
three.
the lizard brain.
We're going to
reptilian
talk about
brain.
that. In fact, that is a good segue for me. Let's go. So I make sure I have time to cover some of the big ones and then some of the other really cool, more unique things. And let's talk about all of that. So I love that. Let's start with, yes, the lizard brain, because that one is starting to fade away. Yay. As one neuroscience researcher said to me, no one has a lizard brain unless you're a lizard. So, which I think is pretty cool. So I love my cartoon here. Okay, so here we go. The triune brain. The myth is that we have 3 layers of our brain and that the lower and middle layers can take over. So here's my brain on the shelf, that we have kind of a layer here, the mammal brain, and then the reptile brain. These get confused as people talk about them. And that lower structures of the brain can replace our cognitive abilities, cause us to do something that we might regret. Oh my gosh, that was my dinosaur brain or my lizard brain that took over. And that was really, really big in the human development world for a long time, like 30 years, a very big myth. It only in the last probably 5 years am I seeing that people are starting to have more awareness that that is a big old myth. It doesn't work that way, that we actually have a systemic brain. And the truth of the matter is that the brain evolved, I love this, in a continuous process of adaptation, that we didn't evolve like geology, where you can like go down through the crust of the earth and be like, oh, and there's this rock and like that. Like, we're not geological, we're human. And so the brain adapted as it evolved. There isn't a reptilian brain or a mammalian brain that gets activated under stress. There are areas, networks, and even chemicals in the brain that have key responsibilities for certain things, but they're inexplicably linked to other parts of the brain team. So I like to say the brain is most best, not a very good language, most best understood as a system of systems. Really kind of like an organization. Like you could have an organization where you had marketing, for example, who has a main thing that they're responsible for, but members of the marketing team may play roles on other teams, like the strategic planning team. The brain is kind of like that, where, and I'll talk about location in a bit, where it's much more about this part of the brain is playing a role in this system, but it's also might be playing a role in another system as well. Very rarely that it's just doing one thing. Intuition, emotion, cognition, and also saboteurs. And I know there are people out here who are teaching different, because I've seen their stuff. I've seen them at conferences. I've had students that have taken their training, and this is not accurate. All of these things, intuition, emotion, cognition, saboteurs, are all whole brain and body processes. You cannot assign these each to a certain part of the brain or the body. I know there's a training out there, for example, that says intuition is in your gut, emotions are in your heart, cognition is in your brain. It doesn't work that way. Emotions are a whole system process that involves the body and the brain constructing emotions around that. Intuition involves every part of our system. It's the gut, it's the heart, it's the brain, it's even probably things beyond us in, we might say like the quantum field. You can't assign this to a particular area. It's more how it gets constructed by a particular team. Now, where this sort of why I think some of this persists is that we do have times when our brains can get flooded with neurotransmitters due to an overload of stress. And it's not the case that the amygdala then hijacks us and the amygdala takes over. It is the case that we may find it harder to focus on something, remember things. This is all having to do with how the prefrontal cortex operates and its particular relationship to neurotransmitters. So it's like you get a whoosh, a flood of neurotransmitters. And my metaphor for that is like a snow globe that gets shaken up, and it can be harder to know what to do. But the truth of the matter is you haven't lost your prefrontal cortex or, given over to a lower brain structure. It's just harder to access in that moment. And sometimes you have to wait for the neurotransmitters to calm down. The other reason that this sort of myth persists is that limbic regions with lower parts of the brain, the midbrain regions, it's actually stuff that's right kind of in here, which is different than prefrontal cortex right here, which is more the area where we're doing more conscious processing right there at the front of our brain. Limbic regions often start the cascade of neurotransmitters that are associated with the fight, flight, or freeze response. So things may start up there. Our higher brains may be harder to access, but they're not gone. That is a myth. So let me pause for a moment and see what either ahas or questions are like. Where would you like more clarity, or what is making sense to you about any of that? Myth number one. Janine, please.
So how does this practically affect, I mean, whether you believe in the lizard brain hijacking or whether it's the neurotransmitters that are just, I like the snow globe effect. What is the practical difference in terms of advice given that you should give to somebody who, say, is experiencing frequent flight and fright?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. One is something that's so let's see. Two big things that are coming to mind, and there may be more. One is that if I hold, my amygdala made me do it, my lizard brain took over, it sort of can take responsibility out of the equation. Because like, well, how could I have responded better because I didn't have access to my higher brain? Understanding that it may be harder to access the higher brain, but not impossible, actually puts more responsibility on the client. And my business partner tells this great story where she was supposed to go to Canada, and she didn't know, she's from Germany. She didn't know she needed a visa at the time because they changed the rules. And she's literally at the airport. She needs to get to Canada to teach the next day. And she would have previously described herself as having an amygdala hijack. And she said, understanding that that my brain has not gone away actually helped me sort of say to myself, can I grab anything? Is there anything available to me? And the one thing in that moment that was available to me is I should call Ann. So she did. And I was not like flooded with neurochemicals, and we were able to come up with a solution. But if she had been in this like, oh, it's just my lizard brain, she may have empowered that, gone with it, given her more reason to freak out. So I think there's more chance to intervene and to tune our attention where it can be useful is probably the big picture there when you're right there. Rather than just, and I've actually had people say that to me. Well, I didn't mean it. That was my lizard brain. I'm like, no, you don't get to say that. Yeah, Marianne, I like it. Like it contributes to limiting beliefs. It can be an excuse. If all you have is that you're having an amygdala hijack, then all you can do with a client is try to sort of help them work to not have it again. But if what you have is, this is a complexity in my brain, then you can help them find more solutions in that moment. So I think it really contributes to emotional intelligence. I'm not going to have a lot of time to talk specifically about this today, but the woman that I follow here who's super helpful, and some of you may be fans, is Lisa Feldman Barrett. And her book, and I think Becky might have a link to that, is 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. And she talks about, she's the leader in the field of the Somebody just might want to go on mute. So she's a leader in the field of what is called the constructed emotion theory. And she's got a longer book about that. It's called, I think it's called How Emotions Are Made. But her book, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain, talks about this very clearly and communicates it very well, sort of why we don't want to talk about the triune brain and think about emotions as being more complex. Yeah, alert us, Becky, that's beautifully said. And emotions are not just one area of the brain. They are a whole system process. They involve the body, but are not limited to the body. It's the relationship of the brain, of the prefrontal cortex, midbrain, brainstem, and sensations from the body. Memory plays a role in all of this in a very complex, very, very quick way creates the emotion. And this is why I think, Amber, to what you were saying, I think it was you earlier, why the idea that you should be able to just look at somebody's face and tell how they're feeling. Lisa Feldman Barrett takes a very strong position against that and basically says, if you don't know their context, cultural, specific, their history, you do not know how they're feeling. Unless very, very broadly, you might get a sense of happy, like that. But you need to know much more specific, and we need to stop saying it's emotionally intelligent to be able to, discern. There aren't core emotions. There aren't universal emotions, and language plays a role as well. So Lisa's book is very, very good about that, but love that as a myth. All right, let's go to the next one, and we can loop back to this if we need to. The next one is, right or left brain, and this came up, I think Mariana's group had this. The myth is one of the hemispheres of the brain dominates in each human being, and you can take a test on Facebook to determine if you have right brain or left brain dominance.
On BuzzFeed.
On BuzzFeed, you can take the test. And you probably, Mariana, you probably have also seen the pictures where the left brain is all gray and terrible, and the right brain is where everybody's having fun, right? Right. Okay, now this one, we are also starting to see that most people that have paid any attention at all have an understanding this isn't quite true. Here is what's really interesting, though. This one's kind of fun, because we have an on the one hand and an on the other hand with it. On the one hand, research shows everything we do, whether it's math or music or painting, language, even language, all forms of creativity and logic, both hemispheres of the brain. Left hemisphere is not the logical hemisphere. Right hemisphere is not the creative hemisphere. In fact, tests of logic, tests of leadership, tests of creativity, when you do functional MRI, which is brain scanning, what you find is more dual activation. You find people that got more going on both sides. And one of the reasons, I have just a quick story about this. One of the reasons I moved to Santa Fe in the first place is I wanted to discover myself as an artist. And that was really important to me. And so I moved out. There's lots of artists here. If you've ever been here, we are Art Central. And so I started taking art classes. And one of the very first things my art teacher talked about was structure and release. Structure, left hemisphere, release, right hemisphere. And when we were painting, it was really common to see someone go in, look at the details, that's left hemisphere, stand back, look at the big picture of the painting as a whole, that's right hemisphere. You are not going to necessarily be a successful artist unless you have some dance between the two. So it's really, what the truth of this is it's not really what each hemisphere does, it's how they do it. It's not that the left hemisphere does language. The right hemisphere plays a critical role. Left hemisphere is more concerned with the words themselves, right hemisphere, the meaning. If you have a right hemisphere stroke, very hard for you. You might have more access to specific words, you're going to have a much harder time trying to discern what people mean by them. If you have a left hemisphere stroke, it may be very hard for you to speak, but you're going to get a sense of how people feel. Very interesting. So it's more how. No structural there was a large scale study. It goes back to 2013. I want to say it's University of Utah, found no structural differences between the hemispheres. So that is on the one hand. On the other hand, so there's a yes and to this. We do not, oops, this should say we do not. It says we have. It should say we do not have. That's a typo. The comprehensive research yet on whether hemisphere dominance changes over time. The 2013 study was limited to ages 7 to 29, and research on neuroplasticity shows the brain does tend to adapt and change through experience. So if you've got a client who has been rewarded for being very detail focused, that's a left hemisphere. So the left hemisphere sees the trees in the forest, the right hemisphere sees the whole forest. So if you've got someone who's been very rewarded, and there are whole professions where it is going to require a lot of left hemisphere activation, accounting, law, some forms of engineering, things like that, you might start to see certain areas of each side become more structurally different, and the research, I have not seen that yet, and I'm very curious to see. Let's take a look at someone from age 20 to age 50 and who is in a particular profession that requires more of one hemisphere or the other, and see whether this is still true about structural differences. So we don't know that. The other thing we've seen is that even if we don't see the structural differences, we do see, and I see this with my clients all the time, that one hemisphere or the other might get activated in certain contexts or situations. They might go to a more detailed focus, or they might go to a more big picture focus in certain contexts and situations. So I actually think in terms of left, right, that the jury is out, and evidence points to that if you really want a takeaway, we're much better off being a yes and, being good at both. And the research on that does seem to be clear, that the most effective people are not, better leaders are not more left or more right. They're better in both. So that's my takeaway, but I'm kind of watching this space because I don't think we're done yet with the conversation. So equal access to both sides, more integrated, more able to use each as needed, that as I talked about in my painting example. So yeah, what questions or thoughts is this myth bringing up? The right and left hemisphere. Curious. Lean into curiosity. Yeah, Becky, for sure. Stay open. In neuroscience, we have to stay open. Contextually, this is interesting information. Neuroscience itself is a 60-year-old field. The very first department of neuroscience, University of California, Irvine, I believe it was in 1964. Harvard started their very first Department of Neuroscience in 1965. It's not very old. And we have only had the technology of brain scanning since for about 30 years. So there's still, this is why we have to stay so open to it. And people will ask me, is there research on this, or is there research on this aspect of coaching? Often the answer is no, because we are looking at two very young fields intersecting. And neuroscience and coaching, there's only one place that I know that's doing like fMRI research, and that's Richard Boyatz's work at Case Western Reserve, where that's their focus. That's his focus, is what can we learn through brain scanning. And, when we use some of the things in coaching, I think it will still come. But for much of what we're, relating to the coaching world, we need to be looking at neuroscience research and mapping it on, because it's not necessarily direct. Young fields colliding like that. So yeah, any other questions or about the right and left before we go into the next neuromyth? Yeah, Becky, for sure. Go ahead.
So Lisa, she just put in the chat, what about the corpus callosum?
Corpus callosum is it's the connection between the two hemispheres. It is the white matter, gray matter, neurons, white matter connections, corpus callosum in between the two. Corpus callosum does two key things: connects the two hemispheres, and it also helps one hemisphere inhibit the other hemisphere. Which is real. And inhibition is an interesting word in coaching, because largely we're trying to help our clients sometimes be less inhibited. But from a neuroscience perspective, you get a more stable brain. So if you everybody put your hands together and imagine this is your right and left hemisphere, and now get weak in your right hand. So your left is not, so your right hemisphere can't inhibit the left hemisphere. What would happen in that kind of brain if you couldn't stop being overly focused on the details of things?
I guess my specific question was,
can I finish my example?
Oh,
hold
I'm sorry.
Let me finish my example, and then I'll come back to you, Lisa, for sure. Sorry, I did not mean to interrupt. So what the corpus callosum is part of what's having, you want a strong corpus callosum, because you don't want one hemisphere to dominate. You get a very ineffective state. If the part of your brain that is focused on details takes over, you lose an ability to see the big picture. If the part of the brain that only is concerned about the big picture takes over, you lose the ability to work with the details. Corpus callosum is part of that. So I just wanted to finish that example. Lisa, what was your question? Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't realize you were still going. My question is specifically how strengthening the corpus callosum and its function, it appears to be a good thing from everything I've read. And I did read that certain activities like playing piano or music can help, but I mean, is there anything we can do? In other words, how do we translate the strengthening of the corpus callosum and its healthy functioning in terms of our coaching techniques?
I think anything where you are, I could spend a whole hour and a half just talking about right and left hemisphere and the different qualities, but the fundamental difference is so let me do this and then I'll talk about that. So they see the world differently. If you put your finger in front of your face and you look just at your finger, what happens to everything? This is for everybody. What happens to everything that's not your finger? It's blurry. You can't really deal with it. You don't really know what's there, but you can really see your finger. That is how the left hemisphere sees the world. Now, if you put your finger back up and you don't look at your finger and you look behind, but don't look at anything in particular, what happens to the finger? Can't you see two of them? You couldn't really paint your fingernail or, count how many wrinkles you have. That is how the right hemisphere sees the world, sees everything, nothing in particular. Left hemisphere sees the details, but not the big picture. So Lisa, I wanted to bring that in because to answer your question, when you can work with a client to both be understanding the particulars, the structure and the focus, as well as the big picture. How does this matter to, what's the meaning here? What's important to you about this? How do other people feel? Much of our empathy is more right hemisphere than left hemisphere. I say more because nothing's absolute in the brain. So helping people really look at both. And what's really cool is that a lot of us were trained to already do that in coaching. to not just work with a client on what are you going to do? What are the steps? How do you put this in a linear process? That would be more left hemisphere. You know, why does this matter to you? What's important about this? If you step back and take a look 5 years from now, what's going to be important? All of those are going to be much more big picture questions. And so having a client work with both is, I think, a really helpful way of developing not only both sides of their brain, but their corpus callosum. So it's a great question. All right, I better keep going because I'll get through a couple more. Those are two of the biggest neuro myths. The next one that I've got is this idea that the brain is in charge. I love that. I have a quote from a comedian who said, "I used to think my brain was the most important organ in my body. Then I realized who was telling me that." So we have a myth, and we have exalted the brain in our world. Now it's, you know, the decade of the brain, and the brain is everything. And actually, and the myth is the brain is controlling everything, but the truth of the matter is the brain is involved in everything. So the brain is not in control as much as it is involved. It's part of our beautiful, complicated, amazing human system. It's a team member. And I think what's really happening in the system is like a collaborative team without a boss. And it's much more what information is coming from where. So every aspect of who we are, including the context and the relationship we have, plays a critical role in thinking, decision-making, mood, and our orientation to life, including our bodies, our personal relationships, the environment that we're in. They all shape how we think. And the research is becoming even bigger on all of this. We might even think of the energetic field or the quantum field that is a little more amorphous and hard to nail down. So the place that I would point you, if you're really curious about this, is there's an area of neuroscience and philosophy. It's an overlap of neuroscience and philosophy called the extended mind, and how we think beyond our brains. And there's a really good book by a woman named Annie Murphy-Paul. She's a science journalist, very credible. She wrote a beautiful book called The Extended Mind, where she pulls together all of the research that points to that our mind is not just this, that our mind is, you know, this is part of who we are, but we are so much more. And one of the questions that I love that you all keep bringing up is, so what does that mean for coaching? And, you know, one of the things, so on a very practical level, it is involve the body. The body is part of the mind. What we feel in our core, how we move, how we gesture, where we even move in a room. When I was first trained in coaching, my training was kind of like, oh, and you know, for an extra added bonus, have them stand up. I mean, I'm being a little unfair to CTI where I originally trained, but it was a little bit like that, like it was optional. I no longer consider using the body in coaching optional. I consider it imperative, because I think we are only, oh, thank you so much, Carrie. I think we are only getting part of the information if we stay to the verbal and cognitive. And we are often getting so much that the client may not have in consciousness when we involve the body. When we even do things like move things out by writing them down or making diagrams, all of these are wonderful ways to help people expand their understanding. So the big takeaway for this one is, don't just talk about stuff with your clients. Get them moving, get them standing at the window and telling, figuring out what they see from there, checking in with their core. All of those kind of things will expand their understanding and bring to the surface what is invisible. The other person that, and I don't have it on the slide, but many of you know already, is my dear friend and colleague, Amanda Blake. And Mandy wrote a wonderful book, and she's a coach, but she's also a neuroscientist, PhD. She has her PhD, it's not in neuroscience, but she's did neuroscience research and she knows a shit ton about it, excuse my language. So Mandy's book is Your Body is Your Brain, and it's brilliant. So that's another, you're going to come. Somebody said, Ann, anytime I talk to you, I end up spending $80 on Amazon. So she's another favorite of mine. Yeah. So it's not the brain is I don't think of my brain as being in charge. I think of my brain as being involved. It's a very key player, but ain't the only one. And maybe not even. Yeah. Thank you so much for getting lots of links there. And if you want to know at the end, like my one record, if you buy one book, I'll tell you what it is at the end. So let me go into two more, and then we'll see what else we have. I mentioned this a little bit. So there's a myth that it's sort of critical to know where in the brain, what, and I will get this from students to say, well, what part of the brain does that? And it's there was a decade of the brain in 1990 that was declared the decade of the brain. And it was all about, let's see if we can find the location for this or that. But as I've been mentioning, the way that the really credible work in neuroscience is being done now is looking much more at systems, at related systems, that it isn't one area. And that what is interesting is that even if you have damage to one area, often you can train other parts of the area of the brain to compensate for that. So we're much more flexible and adaptable. And I think I mentioned this, that, I mentioned the place where parts of the brain play a role. The aspects of who we are and what we do so often involve systems distributed over multiple areas of the brain. A big one for coaching is these two systems, and some of you may have heard about them, called the default mode network and the task positive network. And Richard Boyatzis has done wonderful, wonderful research on this with his colleague, Tony Jack, and they are at Case Western Reserve. And they have looked at what actually happens in the coaching process, and that the criticality of activating not this one part of the brain, but a system in the brain called the default mode network, because that is where you get the motivation for coaching. You don't just get it by focusing on the task. There's another network called the salience network. There is a system that regulates empathy. It isn't one place, and intuition is also a system. So the question that I've been saying keeps coming up is, so what difference does that make? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what difference that makes to coaching. I like to know it isn't just one area. I like to know there's systems, if I'm going to be super accurate, that it isn't just one thing. I don't know. Anybody else have an insight of why that might matter for coaching? Since you keep asking me that, what difference does it make if you know or if you don't know? It's accurate. That's the that's the difference. I might say one difference it makes is for coaches, that what is starting to happen in the world is if you go out and you are telling a client or telling a group about something that isn't accurate, you will lose your credibility. That's, yeah. Mariana, anything else you want to add? I noticed you were
I was
nodding.
just, a lot of clients are curious about that. I'm an ADHD coach, and so I get a lot of the brain questions.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So yeah, you don't want to be sharing misinformation with them. And there's like a buy-in around it if they understand more about what's actually going on. So
yeah, it does. It can be a really wonderful, one of the things about neuroscience in general, I love that you said buy-in, is that I'll give you a little bit of background about kind of some of my motivation for getting into it. Not the only thing, but I was married to a lawyer, bless them, for a long time. My son's father is the operative word in that sentence. And I was training to be a coach when we were married, and it's like he wouldn't buy into anything about coaching, which would have been fine, except he was suffering. And he was suffering in a way that coaching could have helped. He was suffering with questions of meaning. He was suffering with questions of who he was in the world and his purpose and whether he was in the right job. These were coaching questions. And I didn't have a door to help him go through at the time. And I got so frustrated. And all I could say to him was what they said to me in coach training 20 years ago is, trust me, it works. He didn't trust that it worked. So part of my motivation was to be able to have some of the language of saying, hey, here's what I'm seeing right now. And here's, so tell me, let's talk about that. I'm noticing that you're less connected to me and Noah because you're working on a case right now, and I'm wondering about the impact of stress on your brain because I'm seeing it's having an impact here, and here's what I know about stress on the brain. And I think if I'd been able to have some more of that language, he would have been able to understand himself better, and he would have bought in your words. There would have been a doorway to go through. Some of our clients don't need that doorway. I never needed it. I'll be like, yeah, it makes sense to me. Intuitively, it makes sense. Coaching tools, love this new perspective. It's great. Some of our clients, because they've been trained to analyze, if you can't tell them why you want them to stand up and go look out the window, they're not going to do it. Or why you want them to check in on the interoceptive sensations they have in their body, they're not going to do it. They're just going to think you're from California and you're weird, right? So to me, understanding this and having some language is so helpful for our clients. So love that you said that. Okay, here is my last neuro myth, and then we'll see what else is that came up. And I have some notes of stuff that you asked earlier. Here's an interesting one. Anyone can change. This is interesting. Okay, so in the human development field, I've been in this field for over 20 years, and I loved this idea. It drew me to the field in the first place. People are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. There is possibility for everyone. Everyone can change if they just engage with personal development. And then I ran into a diagnosed sociopath. And that kind of made me question this and made me look at that area of things. The bottom line is there are people that may not be able to change, and it could be as high as 10 to 20% of the population because they're missing core neural structures that are developed with reasonably secure attachment early in life. And they may be able to change some behavior, but in terms of, for example, personality disorders, personality is seen in the literature, in the research, as being fairly stable. And one of the people that I follow in this arena has become a friend and colleague. Her name is Dr. Ramani, and she works with narcissism. If you want to follow the narcissism bandwagon, you can go check out Dr. Ramani on YouTube. And people will say to her, well, what do you mean narcissists can't change, or sociopaths can't change, or people with personality disorders? And one of the things she will say is, well, you think about yourself. Think about your personality. You have an agreeable personality, for example, or an open personality. Change that. Could you change that? And you really can start seeing, like, no, you probably can't change things on a personality level. You might be able to adopt certain behaviors, but core change, the myth of just give everybody enough work, what they find in the research is, no, there are people that they're probably not going to be able to, and number one, and number two, they may not see that they have a problem, and number three, they won't stick with it. So, some therapists say people that are, on the personality disorder spectrum, that if they had enough therapy over enough years, maybe they could, and that might be true, but you would be looking at the kind of commitment that, is incredibly rare that people have. these are neural connections that get created. This goes back to kind of the stages of development. There's a critical window to create some of these connections. It's very early in life, like in the first 3 years. They relate to self-regulation. Empathy is a big one. Interpersonal relatedness. They didn't develop in childhood, and this can be because of genetics. Could be that they have wonderful family, but genetics are playing a role, or it could be from trauma, or both. It tends, so I say tends to manifest in very difficult personalities. It's also, you know, and Mariana was saying, you know, you work with ADHD. It's also in sometimes that's the case. And it's a question of, well, what kind of change are we looking for? Are we looking just to develop more strategies for and adaptations? And that's a wonderful change. And that's great. Autism spectrum disorder that people also, I like ASS, even though I don't like what it spells, but autism spectrum syndrome better than disorder. But you're also not going to change. You're not going to have a fundamental neural change with certain types of autism. Yeah, Marianne, do you want to jump in? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it becomes around acceptance and management rather than any kind of fixing or rewiring, right? So, yeah.
Right. And you can maybe wire in some, you know, new habits that are more effective in the management of this. And I think that's more the case in ADHD and in certain, you know, high functioning autism. It's not as much the case with people who have personality disorders such as high narcissism, sociopathy, psychopathy. One of the reasons being is that if you have, let me pull this down and we can see what other questions are coming up. In the case of ADHD, it's probably and also autism, certain forms of autism, people are often aware this may not be working. This is like, I don't like the fact that I keep missing all my appointments. Gosh darn it, or I can't complete my school papers. It causes distress to the person. So they're going to hopefully seek out somebody like Mariana, like, help me with this. Help me be more effective. In the case of personality disorders such as narcissism, sociopathy, psychopathy, they don't see a problem. Everybody else is the problem. And so you miss the core motivation that you would have with more, you know, what we think of as sort of neurodiversity, autism, ADHD, like that. So I no longer believe everybody can change. And sometimes when I'm working with clients, first of all, I don't take on clients who have a personality disorder because I don't find that they can engage authentically in the process. But I have a lot of clients who are dealing with this in the workplace, in romantic relationships, in the family. And generally what I'm helping them do is deal with the PTSD that has generally occurred as a response and help them find coping strategies and help them find ways to rebuild their lives and hopefully get out of the situation. Is usually what I'm doing there as a coach. So big myth, not a very popular one. I didn't like it when I first kind of came across it. Like, that's throwing my whole core belief system out of whack. But I tell you, it is, you know, does seem to be validated by the research. Okay, so those were my big ones. What is important to you that came up either from your small groups that I haven't talked about yet? And so please feel free to throw something back in, or another question that has emerged in the meantime, as we've gone through all of my big five.
So we had a few come up in the chat. I'm with you. It is a hard one to jump to, as far as like not being able to change the brain. The change only happens with those people that it can't change. But one of my questions was the core neutral structures that are missing. So you were talking about that. I was like, isn't that the brain taking over control? So I think of people that have chemical issues, and you just talked about people that have personality disorders. Isn't their brain running things?
The brain is very involved. You know, you don't want to be walking around without a brain. And I'm not going to go political for a minute. You don't want to be walking around without a brain. So the brain is very highly involved, and the brain is very critical. It's a critical team player. So if you're missing core neural structures, so let's talk about empathy, for example. If you are missing some of what gets developed by, and this can be modulated also genetically. But one of the ways we develop empathy is by being related to in an empathetic way, by being responded to as a child with empathy. And if you didn't have that, you may not develop that. And empathy is a complicated one, but the aspect of empathy that is related to really feeling other people, being able to really walk in their shoes, that is the brain working with the body. So, it's playing a role there, but a very critical role. So I hope that answers that.
Yes. And then I think this one partners really well from Mariana. She says, so how does neuroplasticity play into those people who cannot change?
Well, it's kind of like neuroplasticity has its limits. And so, it's kind of like if there are certain structures that do not develop, like if you are born without a visual cortex, you can't neuroplasticize your way to having a visual cortex. There are limits. Now, the other part that plays, so if you don't have these core neural structures that are related to things like empathy, and they didn't develop at a critical window, it's kind of like there's nothing to stick it to. And then the other piece is, in order for somebody to activate neuroplasticity, so say you've got a client that wants to take on a new habit of being a runner, and running every day, that's a function of of neuroplasticity. You got to get up and do it every day, or X number of times a week, and you've got to keep doing it even when you don't want to. And the problem with people with personality disorders is the fundamental lack of motivation, because they're not seeing that it's a problem. And this is kind of back to, Mariana, if you've got someone who is like, they're going to get fired from work unless they start showing up, that's a desire that is critical for the practice of whatever the adaptations are that you need to help them with. Critical, they have to want to. And it's critical for coaching. You can't coach somebody who doesn't want to be coached, or who can't see they are a common denominator in all of their problems. Right.
So can I piggyback just a little bit off of that?
Please.
So in that case, then do we often, and maybe you don't have the data for this, but do we often see that people with personality disorders like those that you've shared are not really coming to coaching? Unless they're like mandated by their employer or something, right?
Right. So my friend, Dr. Ramani, we talked about this at one point in time, and she said, I think you guys probably see, she's a therapist, I think you see more than we do. And I was like, really? She said, yeah, because because coaching is perceived as getting something you want. And they also can maybe sneak in through leadership programs. It doesn't feel like a fix you thing. It feels like ooh, how do I get the next promotion?
Next step, yeah. Like, okay.
That. But I also, but then when it comes into, and I don't know that the research has been done yet on this. I think so if they're seeking it, they're not necessarily seeking it for personal development, or, I've had clients come to me and say, I am really struggling with relationships and I think I'm the problem. And I'm like, great, we can work with that. That's like, why do you think you're the problem? Well, I keep losing my temper. And I just think people don't like, that is such great awareness. Great. We can work with that. We can work with neuroplasticity. We can practice things because you have a motivation there. If I've got someone with narcissism, they're going to come in and say, yeah, got fired again, totally unfair. It's so unfair. I don't know, and it's going to be all other directed. I can't work with that. but I don't know the numbers yet. I still don't think it's necessarily that common. And I think what happens sometimes is, I did have this with one client who I suspect was somewhere on that spectrum. And she was great in the first 3 sessions. And then I started getting real. And I'm, getting real. I'm not like labeling her, accusing her, but asking her questions like, what do you feel like your role in this is? And boy, she got really pissed. I don't think I'm getting from coaching what I expected. This is not what I wanted. I don't really think this is working for me. I'm like, because I asked you what your role is? Uh-huh. Red flag. I always say, if you're going to get sued by a client, it's probably a narcissist. Maybe not. Maybe not. Sorry. Okay. Becky, what am I missing in there? And we probably have like 5 more minutes before we have to wrap up. What's happening in the chat that I'm not seeing?
Tara was asking, could intimacy anorexic fall into this category?
Tara, you got to come off mute and talk about that. I just saw that term yesterday for the first time. So tell me what your understanding of that is, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, so yeah, I have a client who's having marital problems. And so her counselor told her that her husband is an intimacy anorexic, which the husband is not happy about, because he's like, this person that I've never met is labeling me as intimacy anorexic.
I don't know. I mean, my gosh. I mean, any time that we're labeling anybody outside, and as coaches, I think we are a little more reluctant to do that. So yeah. I don't know. I'd have to, because are we looking, it's sort of a spectrum. So, to me, I'd be more curious. And especially if I'm, if somebody came to me and said, I got labeled an intimacy anorexic, I'm going to get really curious and be like, well, what do you feel like is going on there? And is it narcissism because you don't care about anybody else? Or is it you had an avoidant attachment that's getting triggered in some way? I don't really, when I saw the term yesterday, which was probably like on Reddit or something unhelpful like that, it wasn't in the scientific thing. I'd have to look at it more. I don't think it's a standalone thing. I think it's part of something else, and it's maybe a soft way of putting it, but that we're probably looking at an attachment issue, or we're looking at trauma on their part, or we might be looking at autism, or we might be looking at high trait. Narcissism is a trait. It's not a diagnosis. Narcissistic personality disorder is a diagnosis. Could be that. I'd have to know a whole heck of a lot more. And when I saw it, I thought, okay, now we have a new term, but I don't know that it's really separate from these other, what else might be going on.
Right. But it sounds like it might be also related to childhood experiences, maybe like.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love the question, like, not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you? And like,
yeah.
What is this? And yeah, that is a behavior, not a diagnosis, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
That'd be my take on it. I didn't like it when I saw it. So it's sort of synchronistic that it came up today.
It looks like it's a controversial term. That's kind of, as I've looked into it, that some people don't believe it exists. And,
I think it's a behavior. I think it's a behavior, but what is the, what's up with him?
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's very cool. Okay.
So Ann, it might be helpful to kind of outline, because in here, according to the ICF and the core competencies, we kind of are balancing this weird dichotomy, right? Like, we aren't diagnosing these. Like, what are our boundaries when we're looking at situations as far as people that we think might have a personality disorder, but obviously we're not extensively trained like you are and other mental health practitioners who also might have a coaching background, but kind of maybe bringing that together, because some of the core competencies, right? We look through the lens that everybody is whole and complete, and that we're there to support them, whatever they're searching for. So it's really on them. If they come to us and they have a personality disorder, right? How do we help them move forward in that coaching context that still aligns with the ethics and the guidelines coming from ICF, but also keeping us in our lane, because I see where we can go maybe completely to the opposite end, and we're trying to diagnose people and we're having
Right.
some,
No, yeah, it's
not
such
as
a
helpful.
good question. So two thoughts. Number one, the ICF put out a white paper, I want to say last year, about coaching and therapy. And one of the things they said that I was very pleased that they said was that they said either a therapist or a coach with specialized training. So the ICF's position on certain things is, you know, it's not always therapist. You can work with some of these issues that have traditionally been the realm of therapy if you have specialized training. And I would 1000% agree with that. Now, I don't ask, so for me, it fits more, Becky, the issue fits more with generalized, who can I help and who can't I? So the challenge is less about, does this person have a personality disorder and do I want to get out of here? And it's more about, is the coaching working? And there could be a number of reasons that the coaching isn't working. I'm not the right coach. It's not the right time. I had a client who came to me for career change, and it was like pushing a rock up a hill. And what I finally recognized was and she had I think, you know, it was just trauma that was undischarged and unworked within it. And I'm trained in trauma and I work with trauma, but I couldn't work with her because she wasn't ready to look at it, and kept deflecting, and I could not help her. And we came to the end of whatever the first package, and I said, I am not the right coach for you. My recommendation is you may want to, you know, talk to a therapist about some of the stuff that has come up, but I can't help you. And that's, to me, was ethical. And if I've got, the problem with a narcissist is not whether or not they're a narcissist. The problem is, are they making any progress? And generally what you'll find is they're not, you know, they're deflecting. Everything is everybody else's fault. And, you know, this person and the victim story and all of that. Well, then the truth of the matter is the coaching isn't working. And it is totally ethical to say, coaching isn't working. I might not be the right one for you, like that. So that's what I look at more. And the only other thing that I would say is borderline personality also comes up, and that's more what I have seen than narcissism. And I will work with someone who has borderline if they're also seeing a therapist. Because there's aspects of that I do not understand quite as well. And I may work with them on, I've had a couple of clients who were getting their coaching credential and they needed a mentor coach. And they self-disclosed because that was ethical for them. And I said, yes, I will work with you as long as you have a therapist as well. And it went fine. And we were able to talk about it, but it was harder work because of some of what they were struggling with that particular challenge. It's a challenging diagnosis. So I should probably see if there's anything Carrie and Becky and Jen you want to do to wrap up. And I may not have gotten to everybody's question, but thank you for the wonderful conversation and the great questions today. I've really just enjoyed talking with you. So I'm going to hand it back to you so we don't run out of time.
Yeah, this has been absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much for answering all the questions, and for the engagement has been just so incredibly insightful. I think you may have put this at the beginning, but if people wanted to connect with you or reach out, the best way to do that is
LinkedIn. My website is beaboveleadership.com. If you're interested in any of the training that I do, it's on Be Above Leadership, be above, be above, it's backwards there, leadership.com. You can find me there, but LinkedIn I'm just easy to find on LinkedIn, Ann Betz on LinkedIn. And yeah, I always say yes to requests from coaches.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I think the final thing that we would just have for everyone is we'd love to see you at one of our future events. So we mentioned we've got 2 sessions going on next week. And then, of course, June, our regularly scheduled program. You can see all of that information at the High Country chapter on our events page. You'll get to see all the things coming up, when they're coming up, pick the events that work for you. We'd love to have you and see you at a future event. And then we also have a survey, and I'm not fast enough to get over to it, but we have the survey for, oh, Becky, do you have that? And I'll not do it. Okay, Becky's good. Thank you, Becky. We also have the survey. It'll come to you in an email, but we're going to post it here in the chat as well. This is that survey that you'll fill out. Tell us your feedback, and then that will also get you your CCEU. So with that, hope everybody has an amazing weekend. And again, so grateful to you. And have a wonderful International Coaching Week next week. Hope to see you and soon. Yeah, Chris.
And of course, we'd love to see one or more of these people join the board in the next
join us
month or so.
Yes. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.